Good evening, my good friend, Mr. Ronan.
Evening to you, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm just back from the wild, wild west of work.
Yes,
Back here to then talk about the wild, wild west with you.
absolutely. This should be
And
interesting.
in our delayed discussion of westerns, which was sort of roughly calling the beginner's guide to westerns, as if we know a lot about westerns.
Yeah, we're not like experts in anything. This is just a selection of westerns that might be worth your time.
Yeah, although I will say, it turns out I have watched and seen a lot of western films.
Yes, I've pulled out a fair number of the westerns, but it's not even close to all the westerns that I have, bizarrely.
So, when you were younger, were westerns a big part of the family or anything, or was it just kind of something that crept on over time?
Not really. I think it was. I mean, there's certain westerns that are always on in the afternoon,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's westerns that are on later. I mean, I think a lot of us were first attracted by the films of Sergio Leone, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
and then that just spread and exploded. I do think, bizarrely, Blazing Saddles probably had a big influence as well
Right, that's
um,
interesting.
on westerns and exploring more westerns, um, and then it just exploded with James Stewart westerns. And granted, I am a bit strange because I'm not a huge John Wayne fan, so I don't have many John
Interesting
Wayne
character. I
classics.
have him here, but I mean that's sort of interesting. Sure, we will get to exactly that in our house, especially my granddad's house, mum and dad's side. It was the kind of house you walked into, and the TV was blaring, and it was
Yeah,
some mixture of Bonanza Rawhide. Something was there was cowboys and Indians everywhere,
yeah.
and interestingly enough, for me, when I was going through this thing, I think like cowboys and Indians aren't really a massive thing in the movies.
No, I mean they were in the silence and in the
Yeah,
early days, and obviously they had to say the good guy wears white and the bad guy wears a black hat, and that's why maybe some people are kind of put off from westerns because they are simple kind of stories. But
mm,
then, obviously, as the decades passed, they became a little bit different and became more psychological and more metaphoric and more political. Certainly in other countries, it kind of became more political as well. So they
yeah,
evolved from being these simple good guys versus bad guys. And
I
of course, the
guess.
Indians are always the bad guys, even though it's their
Well,
country. But never mind.
and certainly in the classic ones, indeed.
Yes,
Some more modern examples where maybe that's slightly revisited,
yes,
so to speak. So we're going to do this in a number of ways. We're going to have a general chat about the Western here to start, and then we're going to break it into like three categories of like a beginner's guide, what we're calling the diamonds, the things that I think are the real top of the genre, but I also think of the kind of films that a lot of people will have recognized or at least heard of, and then commentate on whether we think they're good starting points or whether what it is about those films that is kind of great about them.
yeah. They might not necessarily be our favourites, but they're kind of tentpole
Yeah,
films, if you like.
indeed. Then we're going to do the dogs. Do you want to explain what the dogs are?
The dogs are basically the underrated little films or the gems that people don't really talk about or the ones that should be talked about a little bit more, but basically just the underdogs, essentially.
Yeah, underdogs. Because giving you the credit because this was crediting you for the naming convention, please.
Yeah,
And
I'm
then
to blame. So
blame, and then the last one is what we're calling the ducks, and I think this was my idea. So if it looks like a duck, talks like a duck, it is a duck, and this is something that has maybe some of the hallmarks of westerns, but maybe aren't exactly westerns in genre, or at least noticeable westerns to start off with. So
yeah,
some oddball picks.
yeah, the oddballs, the oddities.
Yeah. So I have a question for you, a bit of trivia. In
Okay.
fact, I have two. So if anybody's watching along here, and at the moment we have Sam's declaring his hand. How about doing,
Hi,
Sam?
Sam.
Loves Italian westerns, don't we all? But quite green on classic American westerns. Always more films to see, my friend. Always more films to see.
Yep, it is kind of funny that obviously the Western is a classic American thing, but most people actually prefer the Italian ones. But
Yeah. Well, it's the idea. I'd heard the phrase Italian western or spaghetti western when I was growing up, but I never actually knew that meant that they were Italian made. I don't know. I didn't make that link until way later in my life. So let's see. Here's a question for you, though, right? And anybody who's watching along or otherwise is free to jump in and not Google, but kind of give it some thought. And it is this: what is the highest grossing Western of all time? Not adjusted for inflation, because they don't seem to have done the figures like that. It did look. So the highest grossing Western of all time in terms of, box office takings, worldwide, American, whichever way you want to do it. We're actually going to use the overall figure of like worldwide distribution for it.
Unforgiven.
Unforgiven. As your initial thought. I will also say I would absolutely sucked at this question. I can't tell you how badly I would have done at this. Unforgiven comes in not in the top 25. Surprisingly.
Top 25?
Not in the top 25. Now, what I will say about the top 25 is there isn't half some crap in here.
Seven Brides for Seven Brothers count as a Western.
So, do you know what? I was going to lift that as one of my other shouts, and I kind of left it there because, again, there were denim shirts, but I mean, as far as Western, I'm not sure how much of a Western that is. So maybe I'll float that one out there so people can have a guess and have a think. Sam's pumping for the good, the bad, and the ugly. So remember that it's not adjusted for inflation, so it is quite, a lot of these are going to be post 2000. And in fact, everything that's the top 25 is post 1995 as it goes. So
Brokeback Mountain.
Brokeback Mountain, again, I don't think was considered a Western. I know it's kind of the cowboy romance movie. I don't know. It's not on the list.
It must be a Western.
I don't know. It's a good, the bad, the ugly. Peter's here. Good evening. Good evening.
Evening.
Come in strong there, Peter. Idiots.
That's like, welcome to you.
In case anybody's coming to think, there's something to be worth listening to.
Nobody's ever seen this stream before. That's a compliment where we come from.
Yes, I shall leave that up there at the very least. And leave
that's
that
almost fascinating, Chris.
Yes. And the other one I'm going to ask is, and this kind of leads us on to what is the Western stuff. How many Westerns have won Best Picture? Again, definition of an Oscar.
Who killed Liberty Valance?
Man who killed Liberty. So
Yeah,
how many Westerns? I don't think Liberty Valance won the Best Picture.
Did he not win?
I don't think so. Not so. I did some research here. So again, how many? And I think this is where it's really interesting because I'll leave those two comments up. Oh, Sam's went for Hateful Eight now, but see with Hateful Eight, let's just say you're a lot closer, my friend. In fact, some would say you couldn't be closer.
The Hateful Seven? No. It's not Django Unchained, is it?
It's Django Unchained.
It's Django Unchained.
Django Unchained, by quite some distance, actually, is the highest of all time. Hateful Eight is number 9. Sorry, Unforgiven. I don't know why I didn't say it. It's number 8 in the list. But yeah, Django Unchained has grossed just about 450 million in box office. And for comparison's sake, a film that nobody was going to mention, that's for instance, which is number 3, is The Lone Ranger.
Wow. You kind of.
It's 260. Yeah, it's 260. So, yeah, an interesting list, I think. I'll pop it up and we'll kind of throw it up in a while. But it goes Django, and then the only thing that's even remotely close to it is a film that I think is quite divisive in Dances with Wolves, which is,
yeah,
it's one of those you wouldn't know whether to go in like an underrated gem or in one of the classics, even though, it kind of falls in neither in some ways. I've
still never seen Dances with Wolves.
Some of us are old enough to have seen it in the cinema.
How many Westerns have won the best?
How many?
Is it not? No, I was going to say the musical one with Clint Eastwood and Lee Marvin, Paint Your Wagon. Or did somebody win an Oscar for that? Did Lee Marvin win an Oscar for that?
Yeah, they may have done, but Best Picture, right?
Yeah,
so
Best Picture.
This might be worth giving you the answer. Because I Googled this a couple of times, and it depends on obviously your definition of what you include as a Western. So something like Gone with the Wind, we're not including as an Oscar, even though it's kind of set in American Civil War, because ostensibly it's a war film, etc.
Yeah.
Carl's in here. Good evening. Good evening.
Evening, sir.
And yes, Peter, it is wrong to say
It's not wrong because I prefer Lone Ranger as well. So
I quite like Django. You know, shoot me. It's like all Tarantino movies, insofar as it's a hodgepodge of other movies I've seen before, kind of sliced together, and is a bit jingoistic and a bit insulting. But
an hour and a quarter shorter, it'd be a lot better.
That would also be true, but I think it's we shall see. But yeah, four Best Picture Oscar winners, right?
4. High noon.
So Cimarron from 1931 is one.
Of course.
Never seen it. And then you have to go to 1990 for Dances with Wolves, then to 92 for Unforgiven, and then to 2007 for No Country for Old Men, which again I would argue whether it's actually really a Western.
Yeah, it's more a neo-noir.
I would have thought so. Very much in a classic Coen Brothers sense, I would agree. But they're what the given answers are for that. There's a couple of other ones like Gone with the Wind, like they say. They've called Rebecca a Western. Can't see it.
What?
And, yes. I don't understand. So I went with the 4. But I think what's most interesting about that is if we were to include what the eras of great Westerns were in terms of decades, I don't think we'd have the 90s. I don't think we'd have the 30s, but we might have every bloody decade in between.
Yeah. Because you kind of forget that Westerns were a no-no for a lot of years. Studios would just not do Westerns. And even when they did, you would have things like Silverado and stuff that, well, certainly from an American perspective. But Westerns were forgotten about for a while.
The classic era of the Westerns, probably 40s, 50s, 60s, certainly, and then in the early 70s, where I'd say they were in their heyday.
Yeah, the 80s, other genres took over.
Well, I think it's one of those things that when something is like a very popular genre, it kind of falls into that. I suppose at the moment, like there's no superhero movie going to get nominated for an Oscar at the moment because every other bloody movie that's coming out in the cinema at the moment is a superhero movie. So I wonder if back in those days, that was what the Western was like. And it was like, you can't distinguish between them because they're all sort of decent.
Yeah. There's just fatigue sets in because there's so many. Because I think there was a stat that I can't even remember, but I'm just going to make it up, basically.
Yes, that's the best type of stat.
That, at some point, like in the 40s or 50s, there was like 50 Westerns made every year, and then it got to the point where it was like 10 Westerns, and then it just died out. That's why cinema is the only trillion-dollar industry that's controlled by the public. So if the public doesn't want to see Westerns anymore, they won't make Westerns. So if you don't want to see any Marvel films, nobody go.
Stop watching. That's true. Yeah. Very good. Carla said Peter only prefers Lone Ranger because of controversial figures like Arnie Hammer and Johnny Depp.
That was long before the cannibalism, wasn't it?
Indeed. Murdersville's in. Good evening, my friend. He's a particular fascination for Westerns that deal with, in some way, the end of the West, i.e. Lonely or the Brave, a film that I haven't seen. But did you know what?
Yes, that's in my pile somewhere.
So I am compiling a list, let's just say. So one of the things that I want to do today is actually, after our recommendations or the things that we're going to say, I have made a letterbox list of recommendations from other people so that we can kind of pull it all together and say, here is your beginner's guide. And thankfully, some of us have particular areas of interest and particular areas that we gravitate towards that some of the rest of us have absolutely no idea about.
Yeah. Only the Brave is wonderful. Kirk Douglas and Walter Matthau. And
1962. There's
a great scene involving a one-armed man.
Indeed. So, given that we've got particular favourites here, and as I'm proud to said, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, which is one of my favourite soundtracks of all time.
That is getting a Blu-ray soon, is it not, from Criterion?
Ooh, is it? No.
Or did I dream that? I may have dreamt it.
It may have done.
Sure, somebody's giving it a Blu-ray soon.
I'm just gonna, as soon as people put some in the comments, I'm just gonna add them to the list. Honestly, this could be a list of about 400 movies by then, but at least keep on coming. So the absolute greats. As we step into that, it's probably worth defining what the hell a Western is. What do you think?
Something set in the past in America, whether it's actually shot in America or not. Something about, I was going to say the birth of the West, but obviously some of them are about the death of the West as well.
That is one of the interesting points for me, actually, is at what point does it become not a Western? Because there's obviously that Western then going into the American Civil War, you know, the kind of period where you kind of go, is that a bit too far? I
mean, you could say it's about, I don't know, that dreaded word freedom. Because you could almost say, well, Vanishing Point is a Western. It just happens to have a car instead of a horse.
Yeah.
And it's about the end of an era of going where you want to go without being stopped, without having fences, essentially. That's partly what Lonely the Brave's about as well. It is a hard thing to track down, because obviously you don't necessarily need to have cowboy hats and gingham to describe it as a Western.
A Western, yeah. And again, with that in mind, it kind of brought to mind the question, is there a difference between a spaghetti Western and a traditional Western? And again, because I've been kind of watching a lot of these recently, I think there is a very distinct difference actually in tone, given that it was probably 10, 15 years between the making of a lot of the classics in that genre anyway. I would say the traditional Western is very much about creating a home or a stable home or somewhere that you can, you know, be comfortable and not have to worry. But as it turns out, there's a lot of conflict around at that time. So you normally have to fight for your land and fight for your place. Whereas a spaghetti Western, I feel, is a bit different.
Yeah, I mean, obviously spaghetti Westerns is where it was shot. Obviously they didn't start until like the mid-60s, once the Western had become a template, but they took that template, and I don't know whether they're more hysterical, not in a bad way, but they just amped everything up. You could argue spaghetti Westerns are more political, even though obviously some of the Westerns and traditional Westerns in the 50s became more political about McCarthyism and stuff like that, and communism. They stuck that kind of stuff in. Spaghetti Westerns more violent, I guess. The music became more ornate and expressive, thank goodness. Because one of the downsides of traditional Westerns is generally the scores are quite bad and kind of standard and stock, whereas spaghetti Westerns just have a different kind of life to them.
Phenomenal.
And energy to them.
I mean, the works of art in their own right, you know, whereas I think there's more of a focus on the danger or the threat in spaghetti Westerns. You know, it became very much, I would say they're both at the heart of it about violence, and you know, people went to the cinema to see, you know, a gunfight and, you know, that kind of stuff. But I think there's real menace within spaghetti Western. Murdersville kind of puts it quite well, I think, and the spaghetti Westerns are more about shades of grey. And certainly when I look at some of my picks of the of my Westerns and things like that, on whatever category, it's very much about shades of grey. The good guys aren't always good guys, the bad guys aren't always bad guys, you know, that kind of thing.
I think they're more morally complex, and generally you don't necessarily know who's going to live and who's going to die, whereas in traditional Westerns, generally you can kind of figure out who's going to survive. Whereas in spaghetti Westerns, everybody had a target in their back, whether they're men, women, or children, or animals, or anything, basically.
Murdersville also says Westerns go to the heart of the American mythos. I think the birth of a nation, and, you know, making the American dream. You could start with nothing, start with a plot of land, start with a fence, and make your dream and make your family and all that kind of stuff goes away. You
could argue the Western and the continuation of the Western is perhaps the beginning of a lie that Americans are told. And you could argue it's also something to do with gun fetishization, started with the Western. And their attitude to conversation is all related back to the Western.
Well, even the idea that you need a gun to defend your land is very much born in that kind of Wild West, and rather helpfully or unhelpfully, Peter, a Western is something with lots of gay subtext. That may or may not be true.
Yes.
Maybe some of the examples will actually totally back that up or disprove that. We shall see as we go through. So, Carl's going to have spaghetti for dinner, and we're going to start by picking out a diamond or something that we consider to be the top of the tier or the most recognizable.
Yeah, I mean, I think
the temples.
I think we'd agreed that, you know, each of us couldn't do like 3 films from the same director.
Yeah.
Now we might do 1 each from the same director, but we can't just do 3 from Leone or 3 from Ford or 3 from.
But I think it is worth saying that I'd say probably more so than any other genre, it's dominated by certain artistic voices or directors. You know, the whole thing is driven by a couple of very keen individuals, you know, in one way. So with that in mind, we'll probably work our way through filmmakers or groups of filmmakers together. So what you got?
I may as well just start with the top. Once Upon a Time in the West by Leone. Again, this was a film that I didn't see until much later because it just wasn't on the television the way the Dollars trilogy was. I mean, certainly in Britain, the Dollars trilogy were on almost every couple of weeks, but Once Upon a Time in the West just wasn't on. And for years, another Leone film was always my favourite, and I'd watched it almost hundreds of times, and I couldn't imagine a film that's better than it. And Once Upon a Time in the West is a better film, bizarrely. It might not be more fun than the other one, but it's amazing. It's 166 minutes or whatever it is of how to do a long film well and not make it boring and fat and needing an hour and 15 minutes cut out of it. It's just spectacular. And talk about mythos. It is all about mythos and legend and larger than life characters. It's almost like the Western Peter and the Wolf. Every character gets its own theme, gets his own theme tune. The music by the maestro is just ridiculous. Leone just pulls out all the stops. He and Bertolucci and Argento sat around a villa one summer and just watched a ton of Westerns. So there's obviously elements from High Noon, there's elements from Shane, there's elements of just about everything. But he takes all those great moments, makes them his own, amps them up. It's just spectacular. If you see it on a screen as big as possible. And apparently there is a 4K coming at some point, and that was one of the reasons I went 4K.
Starting to sweat at the thought of it.
Yeah, I mean, the opening is just ridiculous. Other directors would have done it in 2 minutes. Leone does it for 12.
Well, this is the question I would have. This is the question I would have about it, because it is in my top 10 films of all time as well. I think Once Upon a Time in the West is just a feat of filmmaking and storytelling that is just peerless in some ways. If somebody was going to watch their first Western, I would probably recommend not to watch Once Upon a Time in the West.
Save yourself for that.
It's some might consider it to be ponderous in that way and kind of like overly, you know, fascinated with the idea of holding a gaze and kind of checking reactions and the
lengthening time.
Yeah, the journey of a fly, possibly. This being a major plot point.
Because famously, Clint Eastwood could never understand what Leone was doing. You know, he came from the Don Siegel school, which is great in its own right. So he never understood what Leone was doing with all these long setups. And so as a filmmaker himself, Clint Eastwood is more meat and potatoes and doesn't really bother about style or anything like that or shot composition. But Leone is, I mean, it's a fair point you make. Perhaps it's not the first film to start, but it is a great film.
Yeah. Nazareth Prod says Dollars Trilogy looks beautiful in 4K, especially when projected. Okay, we get it. Yeah. It's fine. You have a nice projector setup. Have you got a 4K projector? I'm impressed. I actually am. All
I've
around the
still,
Peter's house.
I've still to get the first one in 4K, but the other two look fantastic.
Yeah, I haven't picked them up yet. Now, I did, because I knew we were going to talk about, probably between the two of us somewhere along the way, Once Upon a Time in the West, I wasn't going to, add in and do the Dollars trilogy. But equally the same things you say about Once Upon a Time in the West hold true for the Dollars trilogy. They're just phenomenal piece of filmmaking. And because I thought you would start Once Upon a Time in the West, I thought I would go for a Western, American Western, traditional Western, which leads you to a couple of filmmakers. And probably the most famous of those is John Ford. And we'll go for The Searchers. I would say there's probably two that stand up kind of as the two tentpoles of American Westerns from Ford point of view. That's The Searchers and Rio Bravo. But I'll talk about The Searchers because, well, that's the one I like the best out of the two. It's very much the story of a man who comes back to his land, and then threat happens to that land, and he has to fight for the land, or to vengeance or revenge for the events that happen on that land, or otherwise that's spoiling it. And you have the merry gang that travel around the land trying to exact revenge. And I would say for Ford especially, it establishes the idea that a Western is very much about the location being a character. In the case of these, as in the background of the thing that I've put in here tonight, Monument Valley in Utah, I believe it is the real thing about it. The fact that all these films have just a thing that goes, it's not a Western unless we're really using the location and showcasing how utterly beautiful and how the danger within this location is really showing off. I agree with you. I'm not a huge Duke fan of the Wayne. I think his physique often makes the things that his character can do, or how brave or dangerous, a bit weak. There are other people that kind of carry that much better in examples that I'll probably use further down the line. But I think even in its own right, I think The Searchers is so beautifully shot. It's so well constructed, and it is quite a long film for the time as well. I think these kind of very expansive stories need room to breathe, but The Searchers are...
plus he doesn't actually play a very nice character in it.
No,
he's not playing particularly likable. One of my problems with him, he's not the most expressive. He's not the most versatile, shall we say. But obviously he stands as a monument to, when certain people think of the West or the Western, they think of John Wayne. He's synonymous with them, essentially.
Yeah. I think Wayne became famous mainly because he had a great voice, really, didn't he? That's what he had. He could be grumpy, he could be excited, all while never changing the tone of his voice. It's kind of just the way that he had that. So that's my first diamond.
Plus, he never really showed that much frailty or weakness the way perhaps James Stewart did in Westerns.
Well, that's true.
More psychological Westerns, perhaps. So again, maybe that's why certain people gravitate to him, because he has that pillar of strength and the classic American, or what the American is supposed to be. So.
Yeah, it's very much an old style American hero, isn't he? He didn't need to be the muscle bound or other thing that people came into. But I do agree with him as well. I think Rio Bravo is entertaining, but somewhat pedestrian. I think it's more a product of its stars rather than necessarily being the greatest Western tale or otherwise. But I think those kind of those Ford Westerns and the earlier ones like Stagecoach, etc., definitely have a place and have a...
You could argue John Carpenter's remake of Rio Bravo is better, but that's controversial.
Maybe. What else have we got?
Well, strangely enough, I'm going to go with John Ford as well. I'm going to go with My Darling Clementine.
Slip it off my list.
What? Sorry.
You're fine, because I've already done my Ford, but yes.
One of the most filmed kind of stories, the whole Wyatt Earp and the OK Corral.
Yep.
But again, obviously it's Henry Fonda, who I love, and Victor Mature in a different kind of performance than the usual perfect chiseled Victor Mature, who perhaps was never the greatest actor in the world, but certainly a presence. But it's it's beautifully shot by Ford, obviously, and using location, and it is about the kind of building of the West, the unmade church dance scene. But I do find there's also a melancholy about it, because even though Henry Thornton's Wyatt Earp could perhaps belong in this new society, you do get the feeling he's not going to belong and he can't really belong.
Yeah.
So I do find it quite melancholy and not as celebrative as some other versions or some other films about the building of the West. And that's maybe why I like it so much, because it is kind of melancholy.
He's a very different type of character than Wayne's character, the Fonda character of Earp, because he is a guy that just projects an aura that he's got everything under control. He doesn't have to be the strongest guy. I mean, I hasten to say that he shows he's the smartest, but he sort of is, if you know what I mean. He's using his intelligence to kind of rule the roost and show his authoritarianism. But it creates a sort of, like you say, a melancholy kind of laid back Western where there is a lot of threat in, but the famous scene of him lying back and
it's
and looking around him. It's a beautiful film. I think it's a great example of a Western I think people could start with, because it's very much a drama-based Western rather than an action-based Western. The action comes later, but
the Shakespeare scene is wonderful. And again, it has that theme the same way Once Upon a Time in the West does, which the Charles Bronson figure about the building of the West, but those kind of characters can't actually live in that society. So they can help protect it or they can help build it, but they can't actually live in it because it's not for them.
Predictably. It has heart.
There's so many flavors of Western.
There's one for everybody. That's for damn sure. I shall go for one other pick. I'll go spaghetti Western this time. I shall go for something I think epitomizes what is great about spaghetti Westerns. And if we're not talking about Leone, we're talking about the other guy. This is Sergio Corbucci, for the most part. And this is Il Gran Silencio, or The Great Silence.
So that was obviously on my list.
It's sort of unique. I think that's what I really like about The Great Silence. And one of the reasons that it's so beloved is the fact that as a French guy, Jean-Louis Trintignant, I'm going to say that I nailed that first time, who was very worried about the fact that he couldn't speak Italian, couldn't really speak English. And Corbucci says, don't worry about it. We're going to make you mute. So he doesn't speak through the whole film. And basically a revenge tale of the chaotic good against the chaotic bad, and Klaus Kinski, who is a man that is, again, this grey of he is the bad guy killing people, but he's justified in doing what he's doing insofar as bounty hunters were allowed to collect bounties and outlaws and could kill who they liked. As long as somebody had got bounty against their name, they were free to kill them in however they wanted to and do that. So, gorgeous movie set in the snow, obviously. Very different kind of style of Western. Rather than the oppressive heat, we've got the oppressive cold. There's some fabulous performances between Kinski and Trintignant as well. And an ending, or at least in this version, multiple endings so you can have the ending that you like. That is worth discussing.
Yeah, I mean, this is a film that could actually be in all three categories. Just because of it's in the snow, there's a mute hero, the ending, the fact there's a black female lead, and they have a bit of romance, which again, at that time, if that was an American film, they'd probably be told no, even though I think the Jim Brown, Raquel Welch thing happened by that point. I can't actually remember. So there's so many strange elements. It could actually be in a duck, or it's certainly, until the last couple of years, it was fairly underrated because it wasn't really seen. Or I remember seeing really BBC Two one night, and it just blew me away because there's so many of these elements, and obviously it's political because the outlaws You can make up your own mind depending where
That's
you
right.
stand politically, whether they're outlaws or not. It's just sensational. It was one of those films, regardless of genre, that just blew me away the first time I saw it.
And I think it's a good choice for somebody getting into watching spaghetti westerns, for instance, because I think it is so different.
Yeah,
It
you'll get a
sets the
taste.
marker to say this is what this is, and it's not like those other ones that you've seen.
Yeah, expect the unexpected.
Expect the unexpected, indeed. So that was, again, like most of these films, I think they're sort of obvious choices, but I think they're
Yeah.
important to point out because they are tentpole.
And also, allegedly, Clint Eastwood optioned it, but strangely enough, never made it, probably because of the ending.
Yeah, it was supposed to get an American
He was
remake,
gonna
like you
star,
say,
yeah,
and he
star
made.
in it.
Oh, he made another film that I added to my list the other day instead, and it was obviously Turkey, and they just kind of left it then.
Yeah.
So, Carla said, I love how Westerns concentrate making sure they have an outstanding bad guy just as much as the lead, always so dastardly. That is a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and some of the spaghetti westerns, some of the Italian ones, the villain got more and more extreme with more and more kinks and more and more, bull hips and blonde hair and white outfits and stuff like that.
Especially Klinsky's eyes are, a character in themselves in a lot of ways. And while I didn't include it even in my underrated dogs run, otherwise, I think Kubrick's other release of Glee Specialista kind of treads similar kind of ground, and I think is equally, well, not equally, but it's just really good fun and a great film in its own right.
If you want a fascinating read Klinsky's biography. But it is full of sexually explicit material.
Joe Kidd is the film indeed. Thank you very much, Northern. And add it to my list, but I was told don't watch it. But that just makes me want to watch it more.
Yeah, exactly.
So there you go. Any other diamonds? I have one diamond left.
I have a pile of them, but obviously for the purpose of this exercise, I have to say, I'm not going to go into that.
There are certain films that sit sort of in between. What is a recognized, accepted great, and maybe somebody may not have heard of it.
Well, I'm going to go to a watershed film, perhaps. A Changing of the Guard film about the end of the West. And that's The Wild Bunch. I think if you want to jump to modern Westerns, modern films, I know Bonnie and Clyde was before this, but as far as Westerns, obviously the violence is what it's known for, but again, it's more of that end of an era, especially the actors involved. I don't know, I think the majority of them, apart from Ernest Borgnine, who is he still alive? Or just Ernest Borgnine still going at 120? I don't know. But obviously it was a kind of end of an era for the actors as well, to some extent. Yes, it's a bit unfocused because Beckenbauer was drunk as usual. But I think it's an essential Western for those starting as a kind of the start of the modern Western, if you like.
Which turned up every Western's violent, that's it. But there's a nastiness that started to creep in. I think that comes in more modern Westerns, and I think you'll see as you go through a lot of these films and ones that we'll go through. But yeah, Peckinpah, terrific.
Yeah,
Wild Bunch. I keep on going to buy that edition on Blu-ray because it's the only one that's been available for I don't know how long.
Yeah.
I keep thinking there will be as soon as I order it. Like The Wild Bunch is a very famous movie. I don't understand why there's not like a super deluxe whatever. But no doubt, as soon as I order it, and it's only a couple of pounds, it'll appear.
Because before that, I had a DVD that you had to flip over because half the film was on one side and half the film was on the other.
Yeah. Great days.
Those are the days.
Indeed. Mersville put a good word in for a movie about making Westerns, Hearts of the West. I've added it to our list from 1975 and giving you credit for it, which is the most important part. I haven't seen it at all. This is a hell of a list of movies. I honestly, this could just be my watching for the rest of the year. Okay, next one from me. American Western. Again, lots of filmmakers that I could pick from, but one of the most prominent, George Stevens. And I'm going to go for Shane. You had alluded to it earlier. And I'm going to go for Shane. And Shane's an odd one for me insofar as that I think it is a great Western. The story of the people trying to fight for the land, or trying to fight for the American dream, and kind of being kind of railroaded into working for the man, or the people that feel that they deserve the right to the land, even though, like, ridiculously, there's nothing but land. That was the whole thing about the Wild West of America, is that, there was no shortage of it. But you had Alan Ladd, Jean Arthur, Van Heflin, etc. in this. I think Alan Ladd's kind of sort of miscast as this hard man in it, and so far as, I don't think you really fit this role. But he's just kind of the aloof stranger that comes in with the unknown past, who comes to work as a farmhand for one of the local guys, and he goes to fight against the bad guys, and it's kind of it's a bit predictable, maybe the wrong word, but it's kind of a bit too good for its own shoes sometimes, Shane, insofar as, the good guys will possibly win out, or the people will change their minds. Winning hearts and minds is important, as doing all that kind of stuff, but that doesn't take away from the fact that, one, it's gorgeous film to look at, and it is a pretty great and fun tale. Like, a lot of westerns are a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I don't actually have it, but Alan Ladd does have a wonderful outfit. His outfit is amazing.
He has two outfits for the whole film. He's got the outfit he rides in on, and then the one that he works in, and then they actually make a thing of that in the film, which I think is really interesting.
It does have an annoying child in it, though.
Oh my god! Top 10.
If it was Leone, he would get shot and killed. But
yes. If that was a modern western, that would have been great joy being taken and murdering that child in some horrific way. It is
crucified
honestly,
or something.
Oh my god, he is honestly the worst. But I think very representative of when Hollywood were like, we have to put a child actor in here that's lovable and cute.
Yeah.
He's neither of those things, but somehow that's what we have.
But again, Shane can't stay. You can't stay, so you're doomed, essentially. It's like the Seven Samurai, basically. They can't stay in that village; they have to move on. So.
That is very true. It's a nice connection you've made there. What other diamonds do you have?
Well, another Corbucci. Obviously, I prefer The Great Silence, but Django, you have to talk about Django. Again, was banned for a while, and you heard all about the moments in it. It is a film with great moments, whether, when you find out what's in the coffin. Just like Seven, it's not what's in the box, what's in the coffin.
What's in the box?
Yeah. So again, I prefer The Great Silence, but Django was pretty fantastic as well.
Yeah.
Also, we talked about High Noon. I'm not a huge fan of High Noon, but it is one of those tentpole films, and it's about something else. The Oxbow Incident, really small film.
So
again,
interesting
not really about what it's about. It's about something else. But
yeah, I was gonna say Oxbow. I definitely would have put it. I thought you would have definitely had in your dogs category, insofar as, other than it receiving, I mean, for people that we know in our kind of circle of the world, is a prominent Blu-ray release, but I think if you go outside that world, nobody's talking about the Oxbow Incident, for instance.
Well, I mean, it's studio bound, it's small, it's short, it's talky,
Indeed.
But it's kind of wonderful.
Yeah.
Obviously, Good, Bad, and Ugly. Yeah, that's maybe not actually in that, so I'll leave that other one.
Okay. So that's kind of our idea of, I'd say, some of the Tentpole releases that you could have had. There's been some other ones, like Carl had talked about, High Plains Drifter, One-Eyed Jacks. He had put The Great Silence in, and possibly Tombstone is a more modernish one to do. I think all great shouts. One-Eyed Jacks. Have here beside me. Have you not? It's an interesting one. I actually didn't include it in my final list of underrated, underseen. I finished watching it actually last night. It's one of those films I was pretty sure I was told all the time, oh god, it's an absolute mess. It's studio interference film. It's one of those things. It is an utterly beautiful film. I think, wasn't it the last VistaVision film, quite famously? I think something like that. Anyway, gorgeous. Brando, it's got Brando in it. So, step up. And it does kind of descend into a bit too much melodrama by the end and kind of take away a lot of the punch that it has. But I think a very, very good movie. And a film whose story, the making of, is kind of almost as interesting as the film itself. When Brando took it over. Good shout for sure. Okay, dogs time. Underrateds.
Obviously, there's
you have probably about 90 there, so
lots of ways to go. But I'm going to go with one of my favourites, and you can tell it's underrated by what format it's on. It's The Fastest Gun Alive with Glenn Ford, about a guy who has put away his guns, and he lives in this small town, and he runs. I was going to say a haberdashery, just the general store. It sells a lot of dresses. Gingham was very popular. And a gang turn up to rob, or they've robbed a bank, and they turn up into this tiny little sleepy town. And unfortunately, a kid, they're always the cause of problems. A kid somehow tells the leader of the gang that somebody who's the fastest gun lives in the town. So it's one of those films where the town turns against Glenn Ford to help them get rid of this gang. And of course, he's put away his guns for a very good reason. And it's that, Glenn Ford doing that, psychological twisting inside, because he doesn't want to pick them up again, because he knows what they cause and the effects and consequences of picking up guns. Again, it's a really tight film, pretty much just in one location, but it's so good, and it really needs a Blu-ray. I mean, I think the DVD is Warner Archive, so hopefully they will release a Blu-ray at some point.
Yeah,
it's just so good. It's always been one of my favourites. It's a little Western, but it's just so enjoyable.
It's terrific. Not one I'd heard of, I have to say, from 1956, I believe. I've just stuck it in our list. And I love when you're actually much the same as myself, and I actually didn't do any of this, but the DVDs are in cases now and outside of the covers.
Yeah.
So they just getting held up the discs of those. Coming from Murdersville, I think a lot of Westerns, even good ones, can rightly be accused of being too long. I think that is completely fair, which is why I actually think some Westerns is sort of the Western genre can be a bit impenetrable sometimes insofar as somebody goes, I'd like to get into Westerns, but do I have 2 hours 20 minutes or 2 hours 10 minutes to get into what is essentially a fairly simple story? I
mean, a lot of them are concise, the Bedecker Scott ones.
I was going to say exactly that. There is a stream of Westerns that definitely did just go for here's the tale, take all the dressing off it, but I do think they are a bit deeper to dive into. Yeah,
you're right. I mean, perhaps the classics, and obviously Leone, obviously his films aren't short. But I think the dogs are probably a good category for a slightly shorter, more concise ones.
Yeah, so I actually have two that link on from what you say in different ways. So I'll go for the Glenn Ford one, which might tell you where my dog's coming from. I'm pretty sure you did a random review of this. And it involves one of the characters that you talked about earlier on as well, or the actors, Ernst Borgnine.
Yep.
So we have Jubal.
Yeah, that was on my list as well.
Jubal Troop. So, I mean, I got this. This was one of those. I'm going to have to replace this case. It's the way it came. This is not how I treat my discs. Yes. Right, but it was like $9.99 off Rare Waves or something from our Region A, so we'll forgive it. It is a Criterion release with 0 extras.
Yep.
But it does tell the idea of the wandering man played by Graham Ford, who can't find a home but finds a home under this Borgnine's farm. He becomes a worker for him, becomes a foreman, but not everybody's happy about him being there. Let's just say he seems like a fair and just man, but maybe that is not what other people want. And it creates a bit of conflict within there, both inside the home and outside the home. Two rather dramatic effect, I think, by the end of it. I think the conclusion of Jubal is interesting. It goes places, and some of it is not that predictable, which is sometimes some of my favorite parts of storytelling. But I think the story of Jubal Troop, is absolutely terrific.
And it features Charles Bronson in a small role, and it also features Rod Steiger.
Oh, who could forget
doing
Rod
Steiger things?
I was going to
but
say
in the West. But
with
in the
her
West.
and
fantastic.
Rod Steiger is it's funny, like it's a Glenn Ford show. I would say Glenn Ford falls into that John Wayne trope of being not really physically apt for the role or believable, or he's probably a bit too old for the role that he's supposed to be portraying, or to be this handsome rugged man that he's supposed to be. But it becomes the Rod Steiger show kind of second half of the film for sure, and he takes over in ways that Rod Steiger does. It's like everybody else is in a different film than he's in.
Because obviously the stories of Steiger, like singing opera before he starts and set and doing like and just to wind himself up.
What a guy! Like honestly, it's just great. So yeah, that's
I've still to see
the Sheepman. So I've added the Sheepman to the list indeed. Another one with Glenn Ford. Glenn Ford is always very solid and good actor for sure. And a terrible title, I will definitely give you that.
Yeah.
Okay, next one up.
One that I did a random review on a long time ago. It's Audie Murphy and No Name on the Bullet. This is a fascinating little film. Obviously, Audie Murphy, war hero, came back, was awarded all the medals, even had a biopic of himself made. But he was a troubled guy. Rumour was he carried loaded guns about the set. He did have issues on set and demons. And he plays a character who has demons, who comes into a town as the famous gunman. It's kind of dark. Directed by Jack Arnold, who is really underrated. Obviously did Incredible Shrinking Man and lots of other films. It's just a really interesting performance by Murphy, because you can see there's stuff going on that perhaps wouldn't be going on if somebody else was playing it. Again, really tight, pretty short, as most of Jack Arnold's films are. But Audie Murphy's a fascinating character, and it's one of his better films, along with Night Passage with James Stewart. That's really good as well. But No Name in the Bullet is really quite fantastic.
If you could just read it out, the German title.
After Kugel Stand Kein Namen. Maybe.
Just in case anybody's there and it's like, I don't know that No Name in the Bullet. I just know it as that. That'll be great. And Joe Dante's favourite part, according to Davey. There you go. Joe Dante agrees with Sultry Ronan. Daily Star headline tomorrow morning.
Not for the first time. Maybe the last time. I don't know.
Is it Ate My Hamster? What was it? Bobby? It wasn't Bobby Davro. It was one of those ones anyway.
Yeah.
One of those headlines.
Freddie Starr,
excellent.
I think.
Freddie Starr. It wasn't Bobby Davro. It was his alter ego. Freddie Starr. Indeed. Right, my pick is going to be one of those The Town Fights Back films. It is the last film by a rather great director called by the name of Joseph H. Lewis. It is Terror in a Texas Town.
Yes, that is an interesting little film.
Indeed. It tells the story of, again, the town fighting back against an oppressive overlord who wants to take over the town. Charlene Hayden comes into town to, I think it is, investigate or look after the affairs of his father who's been killed.
Yeah.
And what he finds there is not what he maybe hoped to. And, goes to fight back and try to fight back in the best way he can. He's a man of physical, imposing nature, maybe unlike some of the people that we talked about before. But he is also the stranger in town with no real backing. I think most notably, as Murdersville has quite pointed out, We All Need a Harpoon. It has one of the great endings of all films in that you know what's going to happen. It's telegraphed from very far away, but somehow you don't believe that that's how. Like, how would that do that and do that effectively? I think it's fair to say. I'm not sure they pick it off, but pull it off. But I think also that's what makes it memorable.
It's amazing how useful they can be. It's 101 uses for harpoons.
Oh my god, what an ending! What an ending!
Yeah.
And what a great film! I do think Sterling Hayden is very believable as being a hero character, or as being somebody that could have pulled off the fights or the other things that he was being attested to. Another wonderful release and
absolutely
and film to watch, indeed. Another one for you.
I can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm going to go modern.
Let's stop the stream.
It's
you've ridiculous. Just broken the internet.
But for some reason, I absolutely adore this film. It's Slow West.
So interestingly about Slow West, as he reaches over here, as part of my little thing, and other people have made lists, I then started to go on eBay. And one of the best things about doing these things before something like this becomes, before we hit the 10K views, right?
Yes,
is
absolutely.
that you can pick up the likes of Slow West for a few pounds. So it literally dropped in the house this morning. I haven't watched it, so sell me on it.
It is absolutely beautiful. I hope I can now say this. I hope there's a 4K coming of it, because it's absolutely gorgeous. Through different landscapes, through different terrain. Cody Smith McPhee, which is obviously hard to say, is coming to meet his beloved, even though it might just be him that thinks she's his beloved. And he crosses path with Michael Fassbender, who is more familiar with the Wild Wild West. And it's essentially a road movie as they go towards this climax in a house that just sits in a field in the middle of nowhere, which is absolutely beautiful. But the thing that makes it, for me, is it is about the violence and the consequences of violence, the consequences of miscommunication. And it has a beautiful montage at the end of the film. I won't tell you what the montage is about, but it's right up there with the montage at the end of Three Colours Blue. And it kind of takes stock about what's happened throughout the rest of the film. It's just so beautiful and so gorgeous. It's funny, but it's also, I think it was actually shot in New Zealand, I think. I could be wrong.
Right.
But the terrain is absolutely beautiful, and it is well worth your time, I think.
Excellent. So, like I said, that just dropped into my letterbox this morning. Starring Cody Smith McPhee, who is probably more famous now as being a more modern Western with his Power of the Dog, which I think Carl had in his list, which we'll come to later, for sure. Terrific. Right, I'll go for a more modern-ish Western. It's not that modern, I suppose. And a very recent release in 4K, no less.
Heavens to Murgatroyd.
My God, what a great use for it. It's the Sisters Brothers.
I still have to see that, but
so Jacques Audiard, director of the wonderful A Prophet, if you haven't never seen that, tells the story of Joaquin. What a cast in this film! Joaquin Phoenix and John C. Reilly as the two sisters brothers, who go around and are sort of bounty hunters of some notoriety, going to chase after, in this case, two individuals played by Jake Gyllenhaal and Riz Ahmed. Again, what a cast across the West, and the reasons for doing so and why they're needed are investigated during it. Another one of those films, for sure, that is probably about at least half an hour, 40 minutes too long.
Okay, I'll prepare for that.
Once you get past that fact, it's not that it drags or anything, but it's there is definitely a feeling of, is there really an hour left in this film? Like I feel like we're at the point where it's becoming to crescendo. Terrific performances. I think especially John C. Reilly as being the kind of who would be the oafish brother. You can see, but he's a better actor than that. So there's more layers and levels to him. And I have to say, like the 4K, oh man, like I know it's one of those films that has like obviously a filter put over that sort of dulls a lot of the colors down, but the clarity and the beauty in some of it is just it's sumptuous to watch. I really enjoyed watching it. It mightn't be the greatest actual Western of them all, but I think as you kind of touched on this kind of idea of modern Western, I think modern Westerns explore more deep themes than the kind of one-note themes that were in a lot of more classic Westerns and spaghetti Westerns. I think they're kind of using the Western setting to explore like relationships to violence, etc., or relationships of family and profiteering and actually working for the man and being used by the man, all those things. And Sisters Brothers, I think, is pretty great. Has a very small performance by Tim Roth as well. How can you not love a bit of Tim Roth?
Oh, that is in the backlog, so I'll be looking forward to watching it.
Indeed. So, yeah. The Damsel has been recommended by our good friend.
Haven't heard about that one.
Apparently it was already on the list, so that means that Carl already recommended it. He did. So we'll get to it, but that's a double recommendation. Keep going. God, where are we getting started?
What, for dogs?
For dogs.
Where to go with dogs? There's so many dogs of different shapes and sizes. How about Man Without a Star? It's Kirk Douglas torturing himself again, as he likes to do. He doesn't get crucified in this one, but he does have a wonderful relationship with barbed wire.
Love it.
And again, this is similar to Lonely or the Brave, as far as this is about the actually marking out the land and this is my land, not your land. And Kirk Douglas, through previous experience, does not like being fenced in. And he becomes a farmhand or a stead hand, whatever you want to call it, of Jan Crane, who gives a wonderful performance as the actual boss. Co-starring Richard Boone, of course, made by King Vidor, so it does look spectacular and everybody sweats and it's a bit melodramatic. And he takes a guy under his wing and teaches him all about it, but it does come to a head, obviously, and once we find out why Kirk Douglas behaves the way he does, it's just absolutely wonderful. It's another standout Kirk Douglas performance. Again, he does like beating himself up and getting tortured and crucified and all of that stuff. And this film's no different. Richard Boone's just so good as doing Richard Boone. It's just a little gem, and it's great to see it getting a Eureka Blu-ray release.
Indeed. One that's sitting on my shelf that I haven't quite got around to yet. I think it's worth saying that the Masters of Cinema line has quite a number of Westerns in it, classic Westerns and otherwise in it, from all of the big names that are in there. So Man Without a Star. Right, another one there, let's scribble down, sorted. Right, I'm going to double up actually in my dogs and actually go for a idea or theme in Westerns, and that is the female in charge of the Western or in charge of the ranch. So two predominant examples of that for me. One would be Ramrod by Andre de Toth with Veronica Lake and Joel McCrea.
Yep.
And the other one, which I honestly think is one of my favorite films of all time, is Samuel Fuller's 40 Guns with Barbara Stanwyck.
I forgot all about 40 Guns. I've got the Eureka one, but it's
so
fantastic.
yeah, I mean I have both. It's one of those kind of things that you just kind of go, I love 40 Guns so much. And part of that is obviously because Barbara Stanwyck is absolutely dynamite every time she is on screen. But this kind of the idea that we have a female who's just not going to give in to the rough and tumble of the men. You see enough Westerns where the men are put under pressure to kind of either leave or, defend their, and here we have some very strong female characters taking part. I think Stanwyck sort of has the demeanor to carry that off, but I think actually Veronica Lake is a much more surprising one as somebody who's sort of a bit petite and a bit maybe not as domineering, but has used her feminine wiles and the attraction of men to her to kind of stamp her place in the ground. But I think as like a kind of genre, that kind of female in charge of the the ranch sort of thing, a bit like Johnny Guitar or something. You know, Joan Crawford's taking a stab at that again. A bit like Stanwyck can pull that off, I think, a lot easier because of you know, her presence on screen. But I think both films are great. And like
I have become a bit of a Stanwyck addict in last 6 months. She's just so good.
She's just one of those people that just elevates nearly everything that they're in.
Yeah.
You know, by just their very presence.
And she can pretty much do anything. So.
She can indeed. Or could indeed, probably a bit closer to say it.
Yes. We haven't mentioned him, which is ridiculous, but I'm going to go with a Lee Van Cleef film. Partnered with Warren Oates.
Okay, it's a different one than I have.
What more could you ask for? Lee Van Cleef and Warren Oates. It's Barquero. This is a Kino Lorber. And it's essentially about crossing a river. Lee Van Cleef is on one side and Warren Oates and his gang are on another side. It's not perfect. It's 115 minutes and it doesn't need to be 115
there
minutes.
You go. There's another one.
Have been 100 minutes. Sinbad's in it. Kerwin Matthews, obviously not playing Sinbad.
Which is a real shame.
I know, that would have been a completely interesting mashup. And Gordon Douglas directed it. Journeyman Douglas. It's a lot of fun. Is it absolutely wonderful and great? Perhaps not. But Lee Van Cleef and Warren Oates, man. I mean, you can't ask for much more than that.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. I'll throw in a Lee Van Cleef one as well. That's not Savannah. But I'll go for Day of Anger. I think it's rather questionable as whether I would call this an underrated dog or otherwise. I think it's quite prominent. But Lee Van Cleef plays the former dastardly Frank Talby turned mayor, who's kind of inspiring the town around him. But why is he there? All that kind of stuff. Again, one of those very grey characters insofar that he's a good guy, bad guy, and which side of him wins out in the end. You never quite know in those films, but yeah, Day of Anger, I think, is terrific. Spaghetti Western.
We mentioned him before, but this is unusual as well. This is And God Said to Cain, starring Klaus Kinski
from
the
Vengeance Trails.
Yeah. Which all of the films in the Vengeance Trails are absolutely wonderful. There's one directed by Fulci, for example. This is Antonio Margheriti, and this is unusual in the fact, again, this could have been in The Ducks. Well, one, Klaus Kinski is, quote, the hero, which doesn't happen very often. And two, 99% of the film happens at night, which again is unusual for a Western.
Very much so.
It's got a wonderful set piece at the end of the film. And Klaus Kinski is somebody that should have had more kind of leading roles rather than just bit parts. But obviously part of that was the person that he was probably. But a lot of fun. And again, it's just unusual. The fact that it's pretty much all at night, which is a Western usually likes to show off landscapes and mountains and all of that stuff. But And God Said to Cain doesn't. But it's still a lot of fun.
I think Kinski just has one of those faces that's so perfect to be a bad guy that it's hard not to do it.
So it's a bit of an adjustment when you actually watch it, going, he's the good guy. That doesn't make sense.
So I am going to go for, I mean, there will be people that are kind of looking, going, we have got this far. We are an hour and 8 minutes into the stream, and we haven't mentioned one of the most prominent directors. As far as I know, we haven't mentioned him. Of directors, and they'll be going, and you picked that one. I'm going to go for The Naked Spur by Anthony Mann.
That's on the list as well.
Here's Jimmy Stewart with Anthony Mann in the good guy, kind of trying to save the day, trying to do the right thing all the time. Janet Leigh is as the femme fatale of some speak, and then Robert Ryan has been the bad guy / good guy kind of thing. And you know, it's a lot of fun. Again, I don't think it's the deepest Western. I don't think it's the film that you'll be going, oh, what those levels to that or otherwise. But it definitely ticks the box of what good Western should do, which is tell a fun story with Jimmy Stewart in the main role. Like, can't go far wrong with that. Yeah,
I mean, I would recommend The Far Country, which it doesn't actually play that nice a character. Winchester 73, which is fantastic. Bend of the River, which is fantastic. All man Stewart. westerns.
Operations.
Yeah, so good.
Excellent. Many more?
A few more.
I've only got a few.
How about Western Noir by Raoul Walsh? That's Pursued by Robert Mitchum, starring Robert Mitchum and Teresa Wright with Dean Jagger. Again, this is kind of told in flashback. It's absolutely beautifully shot. This is an olive film. It's released with an introduction by Martin Scorsese, so it must be good. It's just fantastic. Mitchum's kind of adopted into this family with a couple of brothers and the sister that he takes a fancy to, which obviously doesn't please the brothers. And obviously murder and chaos ensue. It's just a beautiful little film, and again, a nice example of noir Western, if you want to call it that. But Mitchum, as always, just glorious.
Yeah. I'll interject with a couple of recommendations from the audience. Ride the Whirlwind and The Shooting is a good Monty Hellman. Jack Nicholson double bill. You can always do with a bit of Monty Hellman. Yeah.
Yes.
And then Murdersville 2 Ride Out, which I think is 2 rode together.
Yeah, that's another Eureka.
Which is Eureka. I was looking at there. It's John Ford as well. I think that's the one you're thinking about, which I haven't seen yet. I have to say it's on the list of things sitting on the shelf and get put together. I have 2 more. Again, I'll say 2 more, but one's Jeremiah Johnson. Like, it's not exactly an obscure film, so we'll put that to the side, and questionable whether it's really a Western, but anyway. But I'll go for the other one, which is The Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean. You know, there's been a couple of tellings of the story of Judge Roy Bean. I think Time for Dying does it on the Indicator releases in much more, let's say, less pleasant circumstances. They don't represent him very well. He's more of a joke character, as he seems to be in a lot more of those. In this one, he's much more of a hero and a savior, as he comes in and saves an out posing, or a little town that he kind of takes under his wing. He gives it organization and rule and sets it on its way as a hero of the hour. It is a great performance by Paul Newman. It's a lot of fun. Again, probably about half an hour too long, possibly 50 minutes too long for sure, but a fun film all yes.
How about Anthony Perkins and Henry Fonda in The Tin Star, which again really needs a Blu-ray. This is Anthony Mann again, but James Stewart had other commitments, so it's Henry Fonda teaching young Sheriff Anthony Perkins how to do his job, and Perkins is obviously not very good, and Fonda is just that steadying hand, and the chemistry between the two are just wonderful. And of course, somebody bad comes into town and Perkins has to prove himself. Whether he does or not, you'll have to watch the film. Nice. But that's a really good one. And I'll just finish with The Bounty Killer with Dan Duryea, the wonderful Dan Duryea, playing, strangely enough, a bounty killer who gets to the point where he's questioning what he's actually doing. Dan Duryea is like so underrated. And he does play one of the best bad guys of all time throughout his career.
Very nice. I'm just going to add in these last couple before I switch to my screen there, but we have had a couple of late additions to this, and that would be a Walter Hill film, The Long Riders, which I haven't seen, which upsets me in a lot of ways, being a Walter Hill film.
Yeah, it's been a while.
The Carradine brothers, the Keats brothers, the Quaid brothers, and the Guest brothers. I mean, you should be writing the cover for these, Carl.
Yes,
for sure. And I don't, right enough, we don't have Lancaster in any of these movies. That might be very, unforgivable, maybe.
Yeah, it was
Maybe that's what The Unforgiven is about.
Yes.
But it was Anna's Raid, indeed. So I have
The Lawman by Michael Winner's interesting as well.
Oh, yeah. I see you did kind of a similar thing to me, which was like, we've talked about nothing but indicator releases for weeks, and there's a lot of westerns in there that we could have talked about, but I feel like they've had their day in the sun. A little
They
bit.
might be in the Ducks.
It might be in the Ducks.
Just
Okay.
one more. I'll say
Go
that
for
all
it.
night. Ray Milland, A Man Alone, which he directed as well. And this stars Raymond Burr and Lee Van Cleef. He plays a gunfighter who comes into a town, gets accused of a murder. Raymond Burr is obviously the corrupt leader of the town. Lee Van Cleef's one of his guns. It's just a wonderful little film. Before that, I didn't even realise Ray Milland actually directed some films, but he did the post-apocalyptic Year Zero. That could be wrong. I did a double bill of them a while ago. It's a really effective little western, and Ray Milland is always that kind of twitchy, guilty character, no matter who he plays, and that's really enjoyable as well. Kino Lorber do a lot of obscure little westerns that are kind of wonderful.
Yeah. Cool. So I shall go for this. If this show's okay. Yes, there we go. This list of recommendations that I've had from people both here tonight and from previously. So I shall take off the banner for that and see. I actually have, if you go to this version of it, I actually have credited who gave us the recommendations. So the Missouri Breaks I have not seen, but upon investigation, sounds right up my street. That's for my night. It's given us that, and it gave us Open Range, which I have to say, I started to watch many years ago and then fell off the wagon for it. I never got to the end up, but it seems to be right. Well, it seems to be right in my wheelhouse insofar as, it has Kevin Costner.
Yeah.
It's a Western, all of that kind of stuff, so that's great. Bad Dead, Black Rock, a very famous one indeed, from Neil's Movie Channel. The Hard Hand, which again is an Arrow Academy disc. Bad Dead, Black Rock, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Bad Dead, Black Rock's in Premium Collection here in Modern Archive in US. Hard Hand is Arrow Academy. The White Buffalo, I don't believe has a release over here, and a boutique label indeed, and I don't know anything about it, which is
years ago.
Shame. You'll see McCabe and Mrs. Miller by Mr. Altman is an absolutely terrific film. I was going to talk about it, but it was already on the list from last week. Thank you very much, Neil. I think it also could sort of be a duck in its own right as well, insofar as it is a Western, but it's not a Western kind of thing, but an absolutely terrific film. Old Henry?
I haven't heard of it.
Much too recent for me.
Yeah.
2021. And then we have in the cards one. So Slow West, you've talked about it. I didn't know you were going to talk about that. Bone Tomahawk.
Yep.
Which I didn't know. The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which is the Coen Brothers, I believe. Netflix, for sure. I will say, I went looking for some of these, and in typical Into the Blue style, do you know how much some of these damn movies are on Blu-ray?
That's no surprise.
The classic thing of I looked at the trailer and went, "Oh, that looks amazing," and then go to look at it, like The Salvation, and especially like Afarim as well. I
have The
rejoice in the
Salvation.
fact
I haven't seen
that Afarim and Joaja or Jaja, whichever we want to say. I love the fact 2014, 2015, 2014, 2018, 2014.
Yeah,
again, things that I'm not going, early year. But just to prove that it did kind of go through these things. Also arrived today was The Homesman. So that was a decent price on eBay. Yeah, so that was the watch there. The Assassination of Jesse James by the card Robert Ford. Another film I never made it to the end of because my daughter was on her way. So we'd started to watch that, and then the waters broke, and we had her in the hospital. So I never actually went back. And
your daughter was literally on the way. I thought you just mentioned she was coming for a visit.
On the way. So
on the way. Okay.
No, I will say it's another film that's quite long. So I may even through that stage have been sleeping partway through it, but I've never went back to it. But I did order it for
still in the backlog
of this. Indeed,
so to see it.
Hell or High Water from 2016. It's something I hear a lot of great stuff
That's
about.
really good.
Yeah, here that's a really terrific one. The Rover by Into the Blue. How Do They Fall, which is another Netflix one, I believe,
Yeah, I haven't heard of that
with
one.
Idris Elba. I'm pretty sure that one is. I have to do that indeed. Concrete Cowboy from 2020. Like, honestly,
It's too
Carl,
recent.
you're a wonder. Damsel from 2018, which was also talked about by Nazim Prod in
That'll
there.
be why I haven't seen it. It's 2018.
It's 20. Ain't Them Bodies Saints? Great cover. Brimstone, a film that I was going to talk about, which was The Nightingale, but it was already on the
Yeah.
list. This kind of Australian Western kind of vibe. Nightingale, I think, is fabulous.
Pretty
I think
brutal.
from Swansea, but phenomenally brutal in places for sure. A film that I believe you've picked up in the past week, which is
I've just
Baccarat.
recently picked up. I haven't watched it yet, obviously.
So it's a Brazilian modern
Yeah.
westerny setting. I think the less said about the better, but I believe my good friend and possible watcher, film blogger Sam, has done many mentions of Baccarat. I wholeheartedly agree with that. The Rider,
Yeah, I'm drawing blanks on all of these.
2017. The Keeping Room for 2014. Blackthorn from 2011. Meek's Cutoff.
I have seen
something
Meek's Cutoff.
I've seen
I have
Meek's
seen
Cutoff
that
as
one.
well. Kelly Reichardt. Love Kelly Reichardt. Kelly Reichardt's films are all sort of westerns, even when they're not westerns. I would say she's sort of the language style that
I think that's the only one I've actually seen of hers so far.
is, and I would wholeheartedly agree with Meek's Cutoff in there as well. I love the kind of laid back style Kelly Reichardt has, and it's done. And then after that, I have been adding to the list of ones that we've been mentioning tonight, both myself, Ronan, and everybody else within it. I shall share the link to this list. So if anybody's stuck for a western to watch, you
know
can
where to go.
You know where to go. You'll know who to blame if it's brilliant. So you can actually
Or
go
expensive. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Or you can go to say that person hasn't got a clue what they're talking about, so you can just tick off all the ones that I've got on the list there and do that.
Yeah, I'm used to that though.
We shall see. Indeed. We have Red Sun. Where else would you get Bronson, Dillon, and Mifune? For sure. What, like, stick those three people on the cover. You don't even need artwork. You're done. And good friend Elliot has popped on. Late to the party, but we'll catch up playback.
Evening.
Loving all these lessons I'm seeing mentioned. Good man. Oh, Elliot, will expect some more recommendations from yourself as to anything that we missed. Which leads us to the Ducks. Now, this is either going to be an utter disaster or pure genius. So the things that are westerns, but not quite westerns. I have a feeling we may have interpreted this slightly differently, which will be great.
Yeah.
So what we're saying are the oddballs of the genre.
Because I think I've actually got a couple that are fairly obvious. But then
honorable
mentions might be.
I'll let you start with one.
Well, the obvious one is Jodorowsky's El Topo.
El Topo, right. So I thought you might go for El Topo.
So
anybody that doesn't know Jodorowsky, because if you just come here talking about westerns, what makes this not a western but a western?
Well, the first half is a western, really, and the second half is the Bible. Because Jodorowsky, is a humble guy, so he starts off with the tropes of the western, because after his early career, he wasn't having success, so he thought, what is success? What would be popular in America? The western. So I'll do a western. But it's because it's Jodorowsky, it's kind of not really a western. I should say, if you're not a fan of sexual assault or rocks that look like penises, modelled after Jodorowsky's, apparently, to the detail, dead animals, then probably El Topo might be a little bit strong, but then you could say that about all of Jodorowsky's films.
Yeah, that's true.
So there are elements. A man in black. He does have his naked son with him on a horse. It's beautiful imagery, as the case with Jodorowsky's. He has to defeat the fastest guns in the desert, who are all different and hilarious in their own different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And then he realizes he needs to find himself after all this killing, and then it turns into the Bible.
The Bible. That's good.
Yeah. So if you're only interested in westerns, just watch the second half. Sorry, the first half.
The first half, yeah.
Go do something else. But it's under the umbrella of it's a western because that's what Jodorowsky thought would sell.
Well, the imagery definitely alludes to that, and it's not like Jodorowsky had a consistent thought that stayed the course of an entire film. So,
in your view of Jodorowsky, he will either be a charlatan or a prophet. The fact that he starts with this montage about the mole and how when he sees sunlight he's blinded, which is a load of nonsense, but it just works for the Jodorowsky mythos. It's not my favorite Jodorowsky, but again, it's probably his most famous. John Lennon loved it. It's a western, but it's not really a western.
Not really a western. I will say, Elliot's come with the Kill Them All and Come Back Alone, which was released on Studio Canal's Cult Classics. It arrived in my postbox about 2 or 3 weeks ago, so I have it to watch. And now that I've got a recommendation,
I still haven't picked up.
It's added to the list, my friend. And if it's not any good, your name's going against it. No, I've no doubt that it will be because I have it to pick up and watch a good old American or spaghetti western, should I say, for sure. Great one. Oh, okay, the first of mine. Okay, so this one, I might be accused of just putting all my favorite films that aren't westerns into another list and then justifying them, which it can be its own thing. I'm going to go for Tentpole, which is quite commonly called a ramen western, and it is a film that is very much based around the idea of the Magnificent Seven. I would say the idea that people want to achieve something and they need special people that are specialities in certain things as they travel through and say, "You would be great for the task that we've got to hand. You could do this bit for us." And so Tentpole is the story of a woman who has been left, or she inherits a ramen place, and 2 illustrious strangers ride in from the west, sit down and taste around them and say, "This is terrible." So they decide to help her make it the best damn restaurant place in town, and so they need somebody to help make the best broth, the best noodles, etc. And they travel around. It's what's commonly known as ramen western, but of course it's Asian and Japanese, so it's really weird as well. Some of the food fetish stuff is, on one hand, utterly disgusting, but on another hand, sort of genius. That's gonna be my first oddball recommendation. But frankly, I just think Tentpole's fantastic. So
Atami was a pretty big loss.
Yes, indeed. As we try and predict what Ronan's going to say next, is it going to be Lone Star?
It's not going to be Lone Star, bizarrely. But I'm sure Nazrin Prod won't be surprised with the one I have picked. And it's Outland, of course, which is High Noon in Space. There we go. Murdersville has predicted perfect timing. This is better than High Noon. It's one of Sean Connery's finest performances. Francis Sternhagen as his medical sidekick is just wonderful. The chemistry between the two of them. It's just Peter Boyle as the slimy bad guy. It's just absolutely fantastic. It's High Noon in Space. That's all you really need to say about it.
And it's got
and
Sean
the
Connery.
Blu-ray, for years it was really dark in DVD. You couldn't see anything, but the Blu-rays have really shown off the sets, where the miners live. And again, the wonderful little bit of trivia that there is a theory that it exists in the same universe as Alien, which is a nice thought.
Indeed. Okay, I'm going to go for it. What I've really discovered as well, apart from being films that I really like, is that these are films that are set in a world that is in conflict. So is under, people are fighting for their own culture, the culture war. So I'm going to go actually Sleeping Dogs by Roger Donaldson. which is Sam Neill's first real performance, insofar as a man that's trying to rebuild his life in a place where there's cultural strife. There's basically a civil war going on in New Zealand around the time, and it's sort of like a political thriller in some places, and it's definitely a testament to the idea that you don't have much money. You only really have the location and the place that you're filming in, i.e. for a lot of Westerns, but you can make a really interesting and fast and far-reaching story that's in when you do that. And they managed to talk Warren Oates into being in it because they fed him 3 dinners and paid him his overnight stay in a hotel, I think, was pretty much fed him full of drink at the time. So I'll go for Sleeping Dogs, and I'd be surprised if it's widely seen as well. So
that's an interesting shout.
Okay.
I'm going to go for one that is actually a Western, kind of, really. It's a Western, really. It's Jarmusch Dead Man. Talk about casts.
Go for it.
Johnny Depp, Gary Farmer, Alfred Molina, Gabriel Byrne, John Hurt, Robert Mitchum, Michael Wincott, Lance Henriksen. Who else? I'm sure there's people I've forgotten. Beautiful black and white cinematography, a great score by Neil Young, confusion over Johnny Depp's character, who's William Blake, and Gary Farmer thinks he's the poet. It's a road movie coming across strange characters, but it's just absolutely beautiful and one of Jarmusch's best. You can criticise Criterion for wanting every single Terry Gilliam film in 4K, it seems, or every single Wes Anderson film in the collection, but I can't criticise them for wanting every Jim Jarmusch film in the collection.
Nice one. Shout from Carl. The Tears of the Black Tiger from Thailand.
It's not on the list, but I have seen it, and it is barking.
Is it barking?
It is barking.
I do like a bit of barking. That is
one of
my. That is one of my favorite. If there is such a genre, such as known as barking, I do like a barking. I do like a barking thing. Next one for me again. I think he's trying to say something about John Sayles.
Yep.
I
was going to, but then I thought people would think I'd just go on and on about John Sayles.
I was going to lift me at one, but again, it's that kind of part where it's sort of Western in some ways, but also not Western enough. Like it's very much its own time and place. But you know, if you want recommendations of great movies, that will also suffice. Talking about recommendations of great movies, and that is, I don't know, again, conflict. Has people trying to escape the conflict and set up home and trust peace and quiet? Kind of what I was talking about with a lot of those classic American Westerns. I've got City of God. So let's another list of, let's pick just some great movies as oddball choices for Westerns. But I think again, a world that is in complete and utter turmoil, that is being landed, is being contested and heavily contested in most ways. It's very dangerous. A world that lives in that with the threat of the gun, and that some people just want to get out and make their own life about it and kind of escape and just find their place in the world. City of God, Brazilian film. I mean, if you haven't seen City of God, there's a reason it's in like those lists of the top films of all time consistently. There's an imprint released here. I have a gold steelbook or something behind me somewhere. This is a film that I do and probably will own multiple times in my life. As soon as the 4K comes out, I'll be in the queue.
Yeah, I probably need to rewatch it because it never kind of blew me away that it has with other people. But again, it's been
controversial.
It's been a while since I've actually watched it. So, how about The Great Scout and Cat House Thursday, which is the title. I'm not making it up. This is another Kino special. It does have Oliver Reed playing a Native American, but Lee Marvin and Robert Cupp, Strother Martin, who is one of the tentpole figures in Westerns himself. This is a comedy, obviously. And it's just a lot of fun about political corruption and money and prostitution, but it rattles along and it is a lot of fun.
Cool.
I didn't make the title up, honest.
Gonna go for an obvious one now. I thought God, given that I've just basically listed three movies I really like, I'll go for something that is very much tantamount to westerns. We may as well allude to the fact that most of Kurosawa's samurai movies are basically western in theme. So I'll go for Yojimbo, which obviously was remade, Fistful of Dollars, and various other things over the years. Django, I suppose, as well. But it's basically the man rides into town and does that bit. There's the man with no name, and just terrific.
Yeah.
The Kurosawa samurai films are basically westerns, whether they're Seven Samurai or anything. They just kind of
or
a lot of the
space operas as well.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. Yeah, indeed.
The thing I love about Yojimbo, well, one of the many things I love about Yojimbo is the fact he does it because he's bored. He doesn't do it for money or for a woman, or he just does it because he's bored, which is just exactly fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm going to go for one of the obvious non-Western films. It's probably a Western. Terrence Malick's Badlands. Obviously, it uses the landscape as Western films do.
Nice.
It's about a couple on the run being chased by essentially a posse. It's about the birth of murder celebrity as well. But it is essentially a Western with that spare look of the film. Lots of space with nothing in it. The desolation of the West. So, Badlands.
Cool. Right, I have two left, and the first one I'm going to talk about is one that really uses a lot of the iconography of the West. It's the kung fu film Millionaire's Express. It is again the birth of the railway as the setting, or the use of a railway setting as that. But I mean, Western, but not a Western, obviously. Sammo Hung sort of comedy kung fu film, but again, a lot of fun. Ticks a lot of those boxes as well.
Well, I'll also go to that part of the world for the good, the bad, and the weird. Nice. I have no idea what film this is kind of loosely based on. Maybe somebody in the comments can help me. But this is just a blast. Perhaps not the best film from this director, but a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Each of the characters have their own character, strangely enough. And it's just fast-paced. The opening scenes on a train is just absolutely fantastic.
That's great. And the last one I actually don't have a physical copy of, which I find utterly bizarre, as it's one of my favorite films. It does have a recently released 4K, but not in this region as yet. So I'm on the fence as to whether I import or don't. And it is a Paul Verhoeven film. You may be sitting guessing what is he talking about, but Starship Troopers is the one that I'm going to talk about. You have the native population that the good old white man comes in to liberate and free, because of the oppressive nature of the thing, given the fact that it's also set in like a westernish setting the planet is. And I think you have something that's an allegory to a western, even though it's a political satire. So right. So Starship Troopers was my last oddball pick that I had.
I guess I've got a few left.
Go for it. These are the interesting ones.
I had to crowbar Christopher Walken in here somehow.
For sure.
It's not Heaven's Gate. It's Shoot the Sundown.
Nice.
Again, this is another Kino special with Margaret Kidder and Jeffrey Lewis. It's Christopher Walken as the man with no name. And obviously he gives a somewhat strange performance. It's all about Mexican treasure and the hunt for it. But it goes at a very strange pace. There's little side avenues and sidebars that goes down. It's Christopher Walken, man. So Shoot the Sundown.
You've managed to get him in.
Yep, I managed
Margot Kidder as well.
Yeah, Margaret Kidder as well. A lot of fun. I mean, again, it's an obvious one, and it could appear in every category.
Yep.
Somebody mentioned gay subtext before, so Johnny Guitar, sensational. Obviously, nobody got it when it came out, apart from the French, but it is an absolute masterwork.
People do say that when you go to watch a piece of art, or whether it's listen to music, or you project yourself into it, so you get out of it what you want to see. So,
I would have preferred if you did a thumbnail with my head on Joan Crawford, but there
Joe
you go.
Crawford.
Here's a film that should be a lot better than it is, but it's not. It's God's Gun with Lee Van
Lee Van
Cleef
Cleef.
in a dual role where he plays a minister or a priest and a gunfighter. It's got Jack Palance, Sybil Danning, and Richard Boone. But somehow it doesn't quite work. It's still a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But it should have been way better. But it's certainly worth a look for double the Lee Van Cleef.
I'm just fascinated because the cover looks like Charles Bronson. Never mind any of those people.
Yeah, and Jack Palance. It's just wonderful. And there's a prostitute called Chesty, and it's not played by Sybil Danning.
What?
Which is kind of bizarre. We talked about Indicator and not talking about Indicator, but I'm going to talk about Indicator and Death of a Gunfighter. Fascinating little film. This was the first Alan Smithy because nobody wanted to take credit for it, despite the fact it's a really smart end of an era. Do we need a gunfighter marshal anymore? The birth of kind of big business and kind of trying to shut that bit of the past out. So for something that nobody wanted to put a name to, it's actually really entertaining.
Yep.
And then one of my favourite discoveries since I've been doing this channel, The Ballad of Gregorio Cortez.
Yeah.
An absolute masterpiece from 1982, starring Edward James Olmos and a bunch of character actors like James Gammon, about a true story, again, about miscommunication and the consequences of that. Just an absolute stunner.
Brilliant.
And well worth checking out.
It actually would have fitted quite nicely. Elliot has just put out a video on the 9 or 7 titles or something that nobody picked up in the Criterion Flash sale. I think the Ballad of Gregorio Cortez would have sat very nicely.
Yeah, it's
in that list as well.
Gorgeous film.
Yeah, that's a terrific shout. The last thing that I want to shout out is something that Carl mentioned, and it was already on my list to talk about, and that is the fact that it's not a movie. But Deadwood, the TV series, I think did Westerns maybe better than anything else in terms of tone, in terms of storytelling, in terms of character development and all that kind of stuff. And I think if anybody hasn't watched Deadwood, it has like some of the great characters I think that have been seen in the Western world, highlighted probably by Ian McShane's dastardly, but kind of lovable in some ways. Head of the town, so to speak, more so than anything else. But Deadwood is just terrific. And Elliot's a way to make another video of more things that people could have picked up. Really enjoyed that video, for sure. And if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out. I think.
And that's not even all of them, obviously.
No.
There's so many.
Well, I looked at myself and seen how many that I still had left to see. It just shows you the breadth of the entire genre, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there are people that say every Western is exactly the same, and they're not really. A lot of them are, but
yeah, they're very tropey. I mean, I definitely think, but because I think one of the things we touched on very early on is like what makes a Western a Western. I don't think it's totally definable either. You know, it's not just very rarely just one thing. And modern Westerns, I think, are playing different furrow than that. This come on says doesn't love Wayne apart from a couple of the Fords. We're in good company there, but he does like his last film, The Shootist, directed by Siegel, with James Stewart, Lauren Bacall, and Little Richie Cunningham. I add it to the list, my friend. And
whatever happened to Little Richie Cunningham?
Well, I thought you were going to say whatever happened
Did
to
he
James
ever
Stewart.
do anything?
Or Lauren Bacall.
Yeah.
Oh dear. So then the only question really remains is if we were to do a topic like this again, or do a genre or a country, where should we do it? Or what should we do it on? That is the big question. So if anybody has any particular areas of interest that they would like us to furrow, or any countries, I mean, I have some that I have a fondness for myself, for kind of doing a beginner's guide to, then please let us know whether in the things here.
I've always had the idea of doing some form of cinema World Cup, but I'm not really sure how you would structure that and how you would decide what a win was, but
well, it
something
was the
to think
same when
about.
I found when I was trying to do even just French films. You know, what makes a French film, and what makes it from another country. You know, for a lot of people, it's who the producer is rather than the director. You know,
Yeah.
where it's where the funding comes from the film. Like you can think of the amount of Czechoslovakian directors that came over to America to make films, and similarly, you know, for even the Fritz Lang films later on in his career. You know,
Yeah.
when did they stop becoming German films? When did they become American films, etc., etc. So,
Or
yeah.
Polish directors going to France.
And oh, absolutely, very famous
Yes.
compatriots of that and the proponents of that. So we'll have to have a think about what we shall do next. If, like I say, if anybody has any preferences or any ideas, or even if you'd like to join in, let's go nuts. You know, this isn't a closed shop. This is very much a community thing to kind of just get a crap load of recommendations so that I go bankrupt.
Yes.
So we all go drive up the eBay market of prices. So maybe it's just something that you have 4 copies of a film that you need to get rid of, right? And then if we do a stream on something, then we can recommend it and, you know, put up the price of it. You know, it doesn't have to have a Vinegar Syndrome slipcase to make it expensive. It can be just obscure.
Yep. Demand. Supply and demand.
And spot the Scottishman. If it annoys the English, then it's a French film.
Yep. That's...
I mean, thank you very much.
Always be relied on zingers.
Oh, Peter. Oh, dear. I expect you next time to come on with a pseudonym and be even more controversial as we go. So, if anybody wants to find you, where might they find you hiding on Tinterwebs?
Solitary Ronin Films at YouTube. I like to be solitary and be in only one place. So
indeed.
I've not caught up with this social media malarkey.
I mean, there's time.
All this MySpace stuff and things. I don't know.
You're waiting for the new version of TikTok before you really jump in.
Yeah.
Funny dances, do the shorts. Yeah. I mean, I'm down. And you can catch me on my channel, obviously, or on Twitter at 7 o'clock Shadow. If anybody that's joined in, and thank you very much, everybody.
Yes, thanks very much for your
amazing, amazing contribution.
Also.
It's been just a lot. Mad Dog Morgan, indeed. I've been called many things, but Mad Dog Morgan is one that I might actually put it on a t-shirt. Carla, I very much appreciate it. If I come
Thanks,
to us,
everybody, for watching.
Everybody else, I'm going to assume that means something like goodbye or thank you or something like of those kind of things. But thank you very much for everybody for taking part, and we'll catch you again next time on the channel on a Thursday, possibly.
Bye.
See you then. Take care. Bye.